This is Popular Front, a podcast focused on the niche details of modern warfare and underreported conflict with me, Jake Hanrahan. Today we're speaking to journalist Robert Evans from Behind the Bastards podcast, and he's going to be talking to us about these clashes in Portland, Oregon, USA between protesters and now federal agents. The police have left and the federal agents have taken over. It's a very weird situation. Robert has been on the ground for more than 60 nights covering these clashes. The demonstrators have attacked the courthouse. The police have been spraying untold amounts of tear gas. The whole thing is getting very out of hand, and Robert is going to explain to us why this is happening. If you like Popular Front, please subscribe to us at patreon.com/popularfront. Before we get into how this all built up and why it kind of is happening, maybe you can explain to us firstly what is happening, because everything I look at, it just seems to be escalating every day. Like, what's happening at this stage?
Well, the last day or two, things have ebbed down a little bit, and they just announced that the feds are being withdrawn, which just means that they're going to have police officers assaulting us again. Basically, we had a general uprising kind of against the police as part of the George Floyd uprising start in Portland. And for a variety of reasons, largely local, they just kept going, right? Like, people kept coming out and fighting the cops every night. And eventually people started assaulting the federal courthouse, which brought the feds. And that turned into something of a war on the streets. And it's been pretty high intensity. We had, once the federal agents came out and got caught snatching people, things escalated to a pretty objectively crazy degree. And I would say things here got, on Saturday night, last Saturday, was the craziest they've been. And honestly, the craziest I can imagine them being, right? Last Saturday was absolutely, it can't get any closer to war without live rounds firing, right? And I say that, but the entire time I was up at the front last Saturday, because they pulled the fence down in front of the courthouse. And so federal agents were just opening up on us with fully automatic impact weapons. But there were also guys sweeping us with laser sights of their fully automatic M4s, live rifles with live ammo. And I was just when we finally retreated because the tear gas was too much, there were just streams of people. I had to break my coverage because there were just 5-6 people in a row who were all just bleeding heavily from the face and needed to be set up with medics and stuff. It was fucking nuts, man. I've never seen riot munitions deployed to that extent. And it is at this level, when it's at its worst, it's at this level where it's you're just shy of shooting.
I saw the footage and I was just scrolling and I saw a bit of it and I was Chile's kicking off again. And then it was oh, fuck, no, that's Portland. That's America. It is actually quite crazy. Can you explain to us what that fence is? I know there's this big kind of battle over the fence. What is it?
Portlanders hate fences. It's a thing. The police initially, when this all started off, the police erected a fence around kind of the courthouse and the Justice Center, which is police headquarters in our jail. And I have a little bit of blame for this because I became frustrated because initially the police wouldn't let people get close to the fence. And when people would try to get close to the fence, even just to touch it, they would tear gas all of traffic. And so I started commenting on the fact that the fence was clearly more important than human life because they were willing to blind people driving cars near crowds in order to protect it. And I gave it the nickname, the Sacred Fence, and that became a little bit of a cult formed. I'm going to be honest with you, Jake. It's happened a couple of times. It happened with an elk, too, which is a weird story.
Yeah, I saw that fucking statue.
People love that elk.
Yeah, it looks cool.
Yeah, it is cool. It is cool. And a little bit of a religion is formed around it. Things are a little silly here sometimes. But so people started obsessing over the fence and gathering at the fence every night, and there were just dozens of battles over it. And the police would shoot the shit out of folks whenever they got close to the fence, which brought people out to the fence constantly. And it was one of those things where eventually the police stopped even bothering trying to stop people from messing with the fence, and so folks would just be tearing it apart, and throwing, like, people were throwing the fence over the fence, and eventually the police realized, like, maybe it's a bad idea to have a fence. I guess Portlanders hate fences. But once the feds started doing their thing, the feds kind of had to relearn the lesson the police learned, which is that if you put up a fence in the middle of Portland, people will come out every night to tear it down. And that's kind of where we are now. And I think the feds are backing out because it's become clear to them what a silly idea it is to kind of be here. Like last night, the feds came out and tried to clear everyone out at like 2 a.m. And all they really succeeded in doing is marching around, tear gassing everybody, and going back inside. And the crowd immediately reformed outside the fence to throw flaming garbage at them, because people just don't give a shit anymore. Right? They don't run away for any reason anymore.
That's what I've been wondering, like, how did this start? I think you were saying it's been going on for like 30 days almost constantly.
63 days.
63 days, fucking hell. All right, so this came off the back of the, the Black Lives Matter and the anti-police violence protests. What is it now? Like, is it something more? Like, have they got demands? What is the protest about?
Most of the people here are pretty much straight up police abolitionists at this point, right? They don't want it, and it's not like on a broader scale, right? Like, I'm sure a lot of people do want that on a nationwide scale, but more than anything, people in Portland specifically hate the Portland police and don't want them to exist anymore because they're terrible, right? Like, one of the statistics I can give you is that 58% of the time when Portland police use violence, it's against a mentally handicapped person. No, they're a horror, and there's evidence that suggests that over the last 2 months there have been more excessive force complaints against Portland police officers than police in any other city in the United States. So they're probably beating the LAPD and the NYPD right now, which is fucking nuts, right? Like, that anyone could beat the LAPD,
right? And it's a much smaller area as well, right? In Portland,
yeah, it's not a big city, right? Mm-hmm. There's like less than 1 million people really, kind of in this area. Oregon's tiny, right? The whole state's only about 4 million people. Nobody lives up here.
This is something that I think is important as well. Like, I'm glad you brought this up because people have been saying to me, oh, you're biased, you don't like the police, blah, blah. And I'm saying, mate, like, go and look at the figures, go and look at the situation that Portland police are in. This is not new, right? This has been going on for a long time, like the brutality of the Portland police.
Yeah, they've been really bad going back to like 1920s, right? In 1921, the Portland police partnered with the Ku Klux Klan. And like, we're handing out, the Klan would pick groups of vigilantes to go enforce the law, and the police would hand them guns and give them arresting powers. And they didn't have to like give out their names. It was like a secret police force that the Klan and the PPB set up together. In 2010, a Portland officer named Kruger was caught keeping a series of Waffen-SS shrines in a local park. And the Portland Police Union, I think his superiors wanted him out of the force, but the police union went to bat for him and defended him and got him an apology. Jesus. And and he retired with a full pension. In 2018, they shot a demonstrator in the back of the head with a grenade and nearly killed them. That same year, there was a dueling rally between Antifa and the Proud Boys, and they caught a bunch of out-of-state Proud Boys setting up scoped rifles on the roof of a building. And they didn't tell the mayor. They didn't even tell the mayor what they were, that people had been setting up a sniper's nest.
With live rounds.
Yeah, live rounds and everything. People no one found out until afterwards. So they're not a great police department, Jake. It's been a long fight with them. And so one of the things that's kind of been frustrating, as important as sort of the story of these federal agents and these federal teams coming into town is, I think there's some frustration. There's definitely frustration on my part, but frustration with people who have been here longer of but the main fight that we've had is with the Portland police, right? Our main issue, we don't like these feds, but the feds are kind of an afterthought, right? They came along a month and a half into this, and all they're doing is kind of a more competent version of the violence that our police were doing.
Right, maybe you can explain them what is the difference between the standard police and the federal agent type police, because as a Brit, I don't really get it, honestly, and I know that a lot of people probably won't.
Yeah, federal agents work more like soldiers, so they're not actually trained in riot suppression. Like, they're not trained, they don't work the way police do. There's a rhythm with police. They're kind of predictable. For one thing, the police will use impact weapons on you to try to disperse a crowd. The feds fire impact weapons into a crowd as if they were shooting a rifle. So they fire for effect, they fire to suppress, they shoot for the head a lot of the time. The people who've been seriously injured by rubber bullets, it's generally a wound right between the eyes. So people are just getting like shot between the eyes with baton rounds. So they're not, they're when it comes to harming people, the feds are much more competent than our police. When it comes to actually breaking up a crowd, they're actually kind of worse, because all they know how to do is fill the area with so much tear gas that there's no more oxygen.
Yeah, the tear gas that I've seen there, I mean, God, I don't even know how many clashes and protests I've covered around the world. I don't think I've ever seen that much tear gas, man. Like, not even in Turkey.
I would be surprised if there is currently a more heavily tear gassed spot on Earth than the federal courthouse in downtown Portland.
Yeah, legit. It's crazy. Why are they doing this? Like, what kind of... Now, I know that the protests are not... They're not peaceful, but it's like, it's a fight. It's people saying, well, they're not peaceful. It's like, well, yeah, you don't say. Like, you know what I mean? Like, the police are doing all this.
Showing up to fight.
Yeah. Like, maybe you can tell us about that. Like, what are the protesters up to? I know they're not all coming to fight, but some have got shields. Like, it looks like Hong Kong. Like, it's mad.
Yeah, the protesters, I will say, I haven't seen any real actions taken that I feel were likely to cause serious harm to the federal agents. People throw paint. The fires that have been started haven't really had any chance of harming a human being. I don't even think, like, they've broken windows on the courthouse and graffitied it, but like, even that damage, I think the estimate is like $50,000. So it's not like, it's not that much. There have been some claims made by the feds that like a couple of agents have been blinded permanently by lasers. I don't know how seriously to take that, because there's been a bunch of sketchy shit said by them. Like, they made claims about, they arrested a guy who had a device they said seemed to be a pipe bomb, but they never charged anyone for possession of a pipe bomb. And looking at the picture, it just appears to be a metal tube. And some of the activists I've talked to have suggested, like, oh, it's probably a glass breaking device. And the fact that they didn't charge this guy for possession of a pipe bomb leads me to believe that he didn't have a freaking pipe bomb.
Yeah, absolutely. But they did tweet a thing the other day where they said, like, they claimed to have found a bag with like loaded magazines in it, and they had these like weird Molotovs that looked like these huge kind of jars, like the Big Friendly Giants Molotovs.
And it was like, and the magazines, the rifle magazines that they found were covered in paint and were the exact color of the paint that people had doused federal agents in, federal agents who were wearing the same kind of magazines. So it's a little, and it's one of those things where it's like, they made a big deal about the magazines, and they made a big deal when they like arrested someone who had a machete, and none of those things are illegal in Portland. 30 round, those magazines there's no law that says you can't have a bag with magazines in it, right? Like, even if they're loaded, it's in no way a criminal act to have that. Likewise, it's legal in the city, or it's legal in the state of Oregon to openly carry a knife of any size on your body as long as you don't conceal it. And there's no, like, it's so they kind of tend to highlight when people are arrested with things like machetes and firearms, but there haven't been any cases of people actually using them to harm people. Someone did swing a hammer at a federal agent at one.
Right. And I've seen there's a lad who's been filming some stuff. I think it's called like A Day in the Life. Very good footage, and it does look absolutely hectic. But like you say, like, a lot of it is kicking back, tear gas grenades, deflection, there's shields. And you were tweeting about the phalanx, like, like the kind of Sparta looking thing. Tell us about that.
One of the things that's been really gratifying has been watching people go from, everybody gets tear gassed and the crowd disperses and everybody runs away, and the cops are just kind of chasing unorganized groups of like fleeing people through the city. to people starting to bring out, traffic cones and leaf blowers and shields, but not really knowing how to use them. To about 3-4 weeks ago in a Telegram group, a bunch of activists started like asking the question, okay, we have these shields, we have these leaf blowers. How do we actually stand, right? Like, how do we hold up when they start charging us? Like, how do we not break and run when they rush us? And they started like working together both online and in person and training. And about 2 weeks ago was the first time where, the feds went out in the street and confronted the phalanx or the shield wall. The shield wall formed up and was able to hold up and advance under heavy fire because they got enough leaf blowers to keep the gas away. They got good enough, quality enough shields. People got like their nerves kind of at a tight enough level that they were able to hold up against the police. And it's been really impressive. Like on last Monday night, when people actually, people tried to tear down the front door, like gates of the courthouse. The feds came out shooting, and the phalanx formed up and forced them back inside. When there's enough people out, it works very well. And the feds have introduced some new tactics to break it up since, and we're kind of there's always a little bit of an arms race going on, but it was amazing. On like Monday night, things got so intense that it was like the phalanx was advancing to like 20 feet away, and people were just hucking bottles at like federal agents with fully automatic rifles, like close enough that the feds couldn't disperse them. It was very impressive. So like, but Portlanders have gotten really good at those aspects of it. Now, on a grander strategic level, I have some issues with some of the decisions people have made. But in terms of like tactically, protesters have gotten very good at sort of standing up to federal agents and the police.
Yeah, and it's weird. Like, I was always very critical of like US protest movements for a few years because it just seemed very aimless, and a lot of it just seemed to be for the gram, in my opinion. And people would say to me, well, yeah, like you guys do it heavy in Europe, but you're not coming up against armed police like we are. But now I'm seeing the stuff in Portland. It's like those guys are going absolutely hard, and they have the armed police, and they have federal agents. What is it, do you think, that is really pushing this specifically? It's become a real, I don't know, it's become like a real center point for like hardcore protesters, as far as I can see anyway.
Some of it is just the sheer length that it's been going on. I know, I can tell you when the switch happened, right? Because for the longest time, people would protest and people would get good at reforming and marching at the police line. But at the end of the day, all they were doing was showing up, marching to the police, getting assaulted, reforming, and marching back to the police. And that was kind of the most folks were capable of figuring out. And that changed. There was an action that it formed up and it marched to the North Precinct, which is one of our police stations, and occupied it briefly. And when the police began to form up to disperse everybody, the crowd moved on rather than kind of waiting for them to start shooting, and kind of stole a march on the police and wound up at the police union headquarters. And they got there, when they got to the police union headquarters, which the police had gassed us a couple of times for getting close to that. When they got to the union headquarters, there were no police there. And this is the first time that happened. And so the crowd had surrounded the union headquarters and there were no cops. Kids started lighting dumpsters and flaming barricades. And then it was one of those things where as press, we were kind of all sitting around wanting to know, like, what are they going to do? What kind of they make? And suddenly the crowd started chanting, "What did you see? We didn't see shit. What did you see? We didn't see shit." And then they broke down the doors of the union building and lit it on fire. And ever since then, that was kind of like breaking a seal, right? Like people needed to make the call to just straight up assault and destroy police property. And once they did that, folks have been like doing that to the courthouse. They've been much more, they've been repeatedly assaulting federal agents. They've been much more kind of willing to break the law since then, to like, in a really like aggressive and straightforward way. But it took kind of this period of desensitization, There was this kind of fear that I think was in everybody's heart as to like, whether or not any sort of, really aggressive action by the crowd would lead to the police shooting. And finally, folks decided to just like go for it. And I can't tell you what it is that led to that, other than just sort of once you've been tear gassed and beaten enough by the police, you do eventually kind of lose your fear of them.
Right, the flame just went too high to go down, basically.
Yeah.
And tell me about the people protesting. What is it like? What kind of a crowd are we seeing? Like, is it black people, white people, locals? Like, who's there?
Yeah, people have criticized the protests for being very white, and that's true because Portland's very white. It's the largest, it's the whitest large city in the United States. I will say, I think the protests are more diverse than the city at large is. Higher proportions of black and indigenous people than the actual city has, and they've been growing more diverse as this has gone on. I don't think it's really fair to critique them for being white because 75% of Portland's white, right? Like, what do you expect?
Yeah, that's always such a weird thing that the right wingers would do. Like, it's all the white protesters, like as if white people can't be pissed off at police violence and attacks on black people too.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's the thing is like, okay, well, if we're all in agreement that white supremacy is a problem, like, are you expecting black people to be the only ones to deal with it?
Right, like as if we'd be like, oh, well, we're white, so we won't do anything. Like, no, it's like, no, you got to do the thing straight away. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's a really weird cross section. I've met people. I've met a lot of nurses. I've met one of the guys who comes out here is like a semi-professional trumpet player who just will play charge music and military marches and stuff, often shirtless. He gets shot a lot by the cops. There's musicians and artists who come out. There's doctors and nurses, people who work service industry jobs, people who are software engineers and stuff. Like, really, every kind of folks from every walk of life have wound up showing up, and there's a degree to which it's become kind of its own self-reinforcing community, and it's kind of part of why I think it's gone on so long is that it is kind of the thing that's happening right now too. And now it kind of is providing sort of a social life, and and also kind of an emotional life for people, right? Like, there's this, the thing that you never get. I don't know about you, Jake. I don't get it as much. Like, going to war zones as a reporter is this thing that I know that my friends who served in the military get, that sense of being in the foxholes with somebody, of being part of a unit with somebody, that kind of bond that comes from repeatedly every single night going into a dangerous situation with the same group of people. Generally, reporter, it's been like a week or two at a time that I would go into a situation.
I know what you mean, but I do find it, I do think it's really powerful. Like, there is something about that where you just it bonds you, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's bonded folks in a way that I think is pretty. It's not something I had gotten to experience before, like the feeling of being part of a unit. And for me, it's been kind of as part of the press corps, as opposed to as part of the protests themselves. But I definitely I feel because it's this at the 7-week point, it's different from just sort of showing up with the crew in town filming a project. It's like I go out every night with the same group of people and we all get shot at together. And it's kind of created a pretty strong bond.
Yeah, right. And then imagine being on the other side where it's the people actually throwing the stuff back. It's people don't realize that there's something about I don't know whether it's a militia or you're saying groups of people going to protest. I don't know. There's a lot of meaning in that, whether people from the outside like it or not. A lot of people oh, they're LARPing, and it's well, actually, for the people doing it, there's a lot more to it. Do you know what I mean? Speaking of which, do you see any specific political ideology from the kind of frontliners, if you like? Are they a group, or is it just kind of we're fighting the cops?
It's mostly. I don't see much. I think broadly, if you're asking for kind of what the dominant political ideology is, there's a lot of I don't know. To be honest, one of the things that's been really the kind there's a couple of different groups, right? There's the more experienced core of the Portland protests, who are the folks who've been activists for a long time, and this includes the people who are the people who are the medics the people who are, when you have a big march, the people who will be like outriders on bicycles and motorcycles blocking roads to make sure that the march is safe. The people who like are very experienced and know what they're doing. A lot of those folks are like tend to be anarchists, kind of old school anarchist activists. Mm-hmm. But the bulk of the rank and file is just kind of at this point a pretty broad cross section of the city. I don't think there's like a lot of I don't think there's much of a distinct. I think that I guess one of the things that's been that is kind of frustrating about American protests a lot of the time is you do kind of get this. Everybody kind of comes in with their pet political causes to sort of like try to make it about it. So you'll be at like a protest for racial justice, and there'll be a guy with a legalized pot sign or whatever. Or people like, talking about circumcision or whatever at a protest for economic injustice or whatever. And people have done a really pretty good job consistently in these protests of kind of, number one, keeping the focus on, there's been a very consistent focus on not just Black Lives Matter, but sort of the violence done by law enforcement to non-white people in the United States. Like that's been a really consistent focus of folks at these demonstrations, that they've been good at kind of, I think, keeping at the center of things. And there's also a very consistent sort of, people who are out there as a general rule aren't advocating for a political system as much as they're like, we need to get rid of these fucking cops and these feds. And they're pretty consistent about pushing for that in a way that I think it's kind of the thing that I've sort of been feeling for a long time in the United States, which is that our protest movements, if they're going to actually make anything happen, need to be very focused, right, about what they want to achieve. You can't just sort of like let everybody's kind of pet political desires become part of like the part of the movement, right? You have to have kind of a focus on, like they did in Hong Kong, like these are our very specific demands. And there's not as much of a specific set of demands, but there is one kind of consistent demand, which is like, we want to, if we can't abolish the police, cut as much funding and manpower from them as possible. And pretty much everybody who shows up now, I think, is on the same page about that. And so I can definitely say, outside of maybe like Standing Rock, this is probably the most focused U.S. protest movement I've seen.
Right. But at the same time, they don't really have an end goal, right? Like, it's confusing to me because I get what you're saying. Like, they want to have a decrease in funding, which is just never going to happen because Trump is Trump. You know what I mean? He's already said he's not going to do it. I don't know. Like, for me, it's like, I'm like, wow, it's incredible that they're still protesting and this violently. But it does feel like, where does this go? Where does it end? I mean, what do you think? You've been on the ground. You know it more than I do, of course. Like, what do you think about that?
Well, it is possible to get funding cut, right? Because that isn't up to Trump. That's kind of a local issue. So Portland has succeeded already in getting about $25 million cut out of our police budget.
Oh, wow. Okay. I'm an idiot then. I didn't realize this. Sorry, explain it to me. How does it work?
Yeah. So, Portlanders and Oregonians can't really make anything happen in terms of the feds, right? The federal government can send federal agents wherever the hell they want, basically, and use them for whatever the hell they want. And that is a broader national problem, right? Like the deployment of these kind of special federal tactical teams that have been being used in Portland and that are going to be increasingly deployed around the U.S., that is an issue that can only really be solved in the long term by kind of national political changes, getting different people in at the federal level, and maybe cutting funding from DHS. That is a thing that like can't be handled immediately, right? That's the thing that's, maybe in November it might get dealt with, but I kind of don't think Joe Biden's going to cut their funding either. But cutting police funding is very doable. So like one of the big things that's happened, because Portland and Seattle have kind of a friendly rivalry, and both cities have been protesting their police very diligently. And Seattle has succeeded in getting, they're in the process of cutting their police budget by 50%, which is huge. And Portland's only cut about 25 million out of their police budget, which is, leaves it at about 240 million. So it's still pretty significant. But they've gotten so far, they've dissolved the school resource officer program, which is like the cops that we have in schools. And they've gotten the gang task force shut down, which is kind of traditionally the most violent part of the Portland Police Bureau. So there have been wins, right? Like they've succeeded in reducing the scope of police in our community. And I think there's a desire to just do it more. Like, again, there's this bit of a rivalry with Seattle. Like once Portland started going off heavy again, Seattle went and burnt down a child prison. It hadn't been finished, right? There was nobody inside it. But there's this kind of rivalry between the two cities. And I think a lot of Portlanders are like, maybe we don't get abolition yet, but we should at least try to cut our police budget as much as Seattle's cut their police budget. So we'll see what actually happens in the long term. But like, it is kind of important to note that like these protests have made material impact, right? Like they have achieved a number of goals as it is. Sure, so it's not, like whatever kind of happens, there have been accomplishments.
This is why I needed to talk to you, because I very clearly do not understand American politics. What another thing I want to go back over, right, is the like, I kind of understand it, but maybe give us an idea of how serious it was that the federal agents came out and took over from the police. Like, that's a big fucking deal, right?
Yeah, it is a big deal. It was a big deal seeing them out. And when they first started coming out, it was really strange because like the federal courthouse is right next to the focus of the protest for the longest time was like the Justice Center, which is the police headquarters. And the federal courthouse is right next door. And people have been graffitiing the courthouse, since the very beginning. But there wasn't a lot of focus on messing it up, right? And that changed once the feds started coming, and they kind of just one day started coming out and arresting people who were too close to the courthouse. And there wouldn't be a warning. They wouldn't declare an unlawful assembly or whatever ahead of time, which is kind of the thing our police declare. The police, there's always kind of an escalating series of warnings before they start shooting at you. The feds would just come out shooting. And they would do it like it wouldn't have to be, the crowd wouldn't need to be very like aggressive or my colleague Garrison is the one who shot the video of Donovan Labella, the young man who had his skull shattered by like a federal agent who shot him from like 30 feet away, right between the eyes with a rubber bullet. And Donovan was just like holding a boombox over his head at a very placid protest. And it's one of the things that's like so unpredictable about these feds is I was out the very next night. So like the night that they shot Donovan, it was a really pretty chill crowd and they just started rushing out and beating and arresting people at random. The next night, people showed up angry. And I was like, I spent the whole night watching teenagers drop kicking the doors of a federal courthouse to try to force feds to come out and shoot them. And nothing happened. Like the feds didn't do shit. Kids were like lighting fires in the street and just like beating on the doors of the courthouse and they didn't show up. And then of course, like 2 nights later, they were shooting in the street again. It's very strange. But the feds definitely, by the time the feds started making their presence known, the protests had started to die down. Like a big night might be 200-300 people once a week, and other nights you'd get like 100-150 people out there. And then the feds started showing up, and just the way that they fight is really visually spectacular, right? Because they have, I would say, they drop 3 to 4 times as many explosives and munitions as our police do when they fight. So people started seeing this footage of these guys who looked like soldiers just tossing grenades in people's faces like they're fucking candy. And, they saw Donovan get shot and they saw the video of those federal snatch vans and it brought people out again. So like more than anything, the federal response succeeded in revitalizing the protest movement in Portland, which, I talk a lot about how military these guys are. And the fact that the fact that they're very good at hurting people and also very bad at winning an insurgency. kind of means that it kind of reinforces my point that they're a lot like U.S. soldiers.
Well, they look like them. I mean, that's the thing. You don't have to be like an ACAB type or an anarchist to see that footage and go, Jesus Christ. Like, the way they were going around was just insane. Like, no police force should be doing that. And I get it. The protests are violent, yes. But it's like you said, like, one thing leads to another. It doesn't come from nowhere. And what about, you talked about those snatch vans. Like, tell me about that. What was that all about? Like, that seemed like Orwellian, watching that footage of that, like, federal agent with no name tag grabbing a guy and flinging him into a fucking, like, basically a civilian van. Like, what has happened with that?
It is terrifying, dude. Like, they were, and it's the kind of thing people would be warning each other. Folks would be keeping an eye on, like, where the vans were. I've talked to a couple of the people they've grabbed, and it's like most of them haven't even been charged with anything. Like, it seems like it was a lot of it was an intimidation tactic, right? Like, they were just pulling people off the street, detaining them for a couple hours illegally, and then releasing them. And it was like folks who hadn't done anything. And that is the thing where, because the people doing it, the feds doing it, were in like these minivans and were dressed as soldiers, it was very visually jarring, which is again why it kind of got everyone's attention. But our police had kind of been doing the same thing for weeks, right? Like, I had one of my stringers got arrested for asking a police officer his name, because the police started covering their names, right? And like, we're going out, and we've had in Portland not only the police hiding their names, but like police from 4 or 5 different agencies, out on a given night. And every one of them has different rules of engagement, and every one of them, it's like almost impossible, if not impossible, to know, is this an Oregon State Trooper? Is this a Multnomah County Sheriff's deputy? Is this a Portland police officer? Is this an officer from another town like Troutdale? Like, you usually don't know, because they're going out of their way to hide things. So like, it is, the federal snatch vans kind of went viral, but police have been arresting people with little to no cause since the beginning. And they've been doing it in such a way that it's kind of impossible to know who's who. Right. So like, that has been happening from a pretty early stage in this conflict. It's just because the feds look exactly like soldiers, seeing them do it kind of sets you off more, because it's like, oh my God, these just look like special forces guys doing extraordinary renditions in the middle of American cities.
Well, it's a very bad message. It sends an extremely, even if it's just optics, like, it sends such a bad message to the people when they're saying like, yeah, can we not have militarized police, to then send in what look like soldiers. It's just, I don't know, it seems counterproductive to me, man.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. Again, this is people complain sometimes because they'll see like protesters throwing fireworks, right? Or bottles at these guys. And they'll be like, well, that seems really violent. And it's like, yeah, that's definitely not peaceful, right? Like, it's violent to throw a bottle at somebody. It's violent to throw a firework at someone's face. But at this point, like, there's a level of like, people are, I think, kind of at this stage of feeling like the continuum of force has justified their aggression, because like one of the things the feds in particular will do is they'll knock people on the ground and then drop grenades on them, which sometimes ignite people, right? Like one of the 17-year-old I go out with got shot in the backpack with a grenade that lit his backpack on fire. Like, they do that shit all the time. And it's just, it's like, what do you expect people to do, right? Like, you can only shoot at people so often before they decide to deploy pretty significant force back. And kind of one of the things people have learned before the feds even came out, one of the things people have learned just sort of dealing with the Portland police is that no matter what you do, they're going to attack you, right? Like, we had, back in the early days of the marches on the fence, people would just march up to the fence and no one would even touch it. And the police would start firing pepper balls into the crowd to try to provoke somebody into chucking a water bottle. I've got all this on like film. I've covered this a number of times. And once somebody throws a water bottle, then they'll justify tear gassing the crowd. And kind of the lesson that they taught everybody, and the lesson the feds have been teaching everybody, is that like, you can get fucked up for no reason. And the thing that people have taken out of that is like, well, then why shouldn't I do whatever? Right? Like, if anything that I do merits a violent response from the state, why shouldn't I use violence?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's in the Constitution, no? And I want to talk about the situation now with what the feds are actually using to fire at you guys. I've been following Abraxas Spa, great account on Twitter, and he's been identifying what they were, and it just seems like crazy. Like, maybe you can give us an idea of what it is they're actually hitting you guys with.
We're trying to figure that out. They're mostly shooting at us. The impact rounds are mostly pepper balls, and they'll throw rubber bullets when they really want to mess people up, or baton rounds. They also have these like pellet rounds where it's basically like a shotgun, but the pellets are rubber instead of lead. And they also have something that's like a shotgun, but it's kind of like, I think it feels like shards of capsaicin, the stuff that's in pepper spray.
Yeah.
So they have those weapons. They have a lot of smoke grenades, which like mostly just obscure things. Like they're not as bad as the tear gas, but we do know from data on them that the smoke grenades are very carcinogenic. So that's not pleasant. And then they have OC and CS, which are both kind of like different tear gases. And the police stuff at this point, everybody's kind of used to. It doesn't really have that much of an impact on me anymore. The federal tear gas is way stronger. And a lot of it's expired too.
That old trick.
Yeah. We go out every night and kind of collect pieces of munitions to try to figure out when they were made. And the other night, again, I'm out with my crew, which includes this guy Garrison, who's 17, and we come across a tear gas canister that's 2 years older than him.
No way.
Yeah, a 19-year-old tear gas canister.
And for anyone that doesn't realize, you are not allowed to use expired tear gas.
You're sure not, and they use it all the time.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you if like that's what's so much nastier, because the federal stuff really fucks you up, right? And some of it's yellow. There's been rumors now that they're using chlorine gas, which I think is just protest rumors, right? If they'd been dropping chlorine, we'd have a lot of dead people,
Yeah.
Got chlorine gas. But it is like the people aren't just like suspecting this because they're paranoid. It's because the gas is different and it hits much harder. And I think more than anything, like it's a mix of them using very strong expired gas in enormous quantities, so that instead of like normal tear gas where it just kind of forces you back and makes your eyes water and your lungs hurt, you start puking. Because it's just so strong, right? Like the density of tear gas, I think, is what's actually having the effect, rather than it being some sort of weird tear gas. Although we do have a colleague of mine took video that is very unsettling of the feds policing their brass. And like there's video of this guy like picking up different pieces of spent munitions and tossing most of them back onto the ground, but picking up and hiding a couple of specific rounds. Yeah, and we don't know which ones he was picking up, right? Or like why he would, because they leave most of their stuff on the street, right? Like they don't police their brass as a rule. They leave it on the street. But this guy felt the need, or was ordered or whatever, to pick up something. And we don't know what that was.
That's very concerning, because even if it's not like, oh, the state told them to, you don't know. Like, I mean, we know what the police are like around there. They could have been like, yeah, let's fucking fire this thing at them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you just have no idea. And they have weird shit. Like, dude, have you seen the bucket and ladle?
Yeah, what they're burning like some gas, like what is that?
Censer. It looks like a fucking Catholic priest from the plague years.
Yeah. Someone told me actually, like I put a video up on the Popular Front Instagram, and someone messaged me and was like, "Oh, it's basically like a huge like thicket of tear gas that, you know what I mean?" And they it's like spraying 100 rounds, but just wafting it everywhere, like
yeah. And it's the first time I saw it on the street, I see it because like these guys march towards me through a hail of tear gas, and you just see a man holding this burning bucket with like a fucking a ladle of poison smoke coming off of it. And it's just like, what is happening in my city?
I've never seen that in my life. I've never seen it in my life before.
Yeah, it's fucking nuts.
So I read earlier that they were saying the federal agents are like pulling back, and they're going to probably, you know, get back in their box or whatever. Is that, do you think that, like, I mean, if the protesters won, or is it they're just done for a while now? Why is this?
Yeah, I think the feds just made an agreement with the local government, because like our mayor is perfectly happy to tear gas us. He did it. He went out, he got very publicly tear gassed by the feds, but like he gassed us like 200 times prior to that. So it was kind of just sort of a photo op. because his competition in the November election also got tear gassed earlier, and I think he felt like he had to do it in order to be competitive. But no, I think what they're going to do is they're going to pull the feds back because they've recognized that it's bad optics to have the feds fucking people up every night. And I think they're going to bring in Oregon State Police or something, and they're just going to have the cops fucking up the crowd again.
So one step forward, two steps back.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I guess it's good. It's kind of up to both sides to spin the optics of it, right? Because obviously, like, we're in a situation where I do think, like, looking at them last night, they seemed exhausted. And it does seem, I think the crowd doesn't have kind of the sheer force to beat them, unless people were to like really escalate things to another level. And then like, that's a terrifying possibility. But like what the crowd does have the ability to do, and I think has been doing successfully, is making their job miserable, right? Like it's come out recently that like the judges who work in that courthouse have ordered all of their employees to work from home because, they've been tear gassing it so much and people blow the tear gas directly back into the building itself.
Oh, with the leaf blowers. I've seen that. It's crazy.
And so the top like 7 or 8 floors of the courthouse are completely uninhabitable now because it's just so drenched in poison. And they're standing in it all night, every night. Like they have really good, CBRN shit. They've got good gas masks and gear, but that isn't perfect, right? Like you can only stand in a cloud of tear gas for so long, even in good gear, before it has an effect on you. And it's also a situation where, like, I know how bad my clothing stinks of tear gas at the end of the night, and how like important it is to like strip it off and wash my shit. And, like sometimes I don't even bring it inside because it'll gas my house. And they're all dealing with that, right? Like, it's exhausting to wear that shit. When they take it off, they tear gas themselves because they're so coated in tear gas. It seems like a miserable job, right? And I guess that's one of the things the protesters can call a victory. Is I think they did succeed in making working in Portland like the worst job in the federal government.
Yeah. They're definitely, they're definitely fighting, and they seem to be really about it. Robert, before we wrap this up, is there anything else that you think we should mention that we might have missed?
No, I mean, it's one of those things. I think there's one of the things that's kind of difficult when reporting on this is I do think it's important to kind of like remember why this all started and sort of like keep things centered on the issue of police violence against, Black people and indigenous people and other non-white folks. I think that's important. I think that's valuable. It's also one of the things that kind of you can kind of lose that thread sometimes as a reporter because it's all become so personal at this point, right? It's become about not just kind of the movement or the broader sort of political desires and concerns people have, but also you've got this specific group of people who has been repeatedly going out and fighting every night with this specific other group of people, and they all know and hate each other. And that's a dimension of it that's kind of difficult to explain, right? Because it's one of those things where you kind of have you have a lot of people who hate each other at this point, right? Like who hate each other personally, not just because of their job, but because like, oh, I recognize you. You're the guy who dragged my friend on his back into a cloud of tear gas the other night, right? You're the guy who conned my friend in the face. And on the cop side, I'm sure like they're like, oh yeah, like that's the dude who fucking shines lasers in our eyes, right? Or like that's the dude who hit like us with that firework the other night. So it's become very personal. And I guess that's like the strangest thing covering it, is kind of trying to keep that dimension in your head, especially as like all these out of town press come in, right? Who like don't really understand the dynamics and who are like, why is everybody so angry? And it's like, well, because they've been beating the shit out of each other for 60 days.
Yeah, I think you've been doing a great job, though, man. I read that op-ed you did for Bellingcat, and I thought it was really good. And a lot of people were saying, like, oh, well, this is something that was done. They were like, well, he said at the start they were mostly peaceful, and then he said about them attacking the courthouse. And it's like, mate, there were 2,000 people and a couple hundred attacked the courthouse. That is literally the definition of mostly peaceful. Do you know what I mean? Like most of them didn't attack anything. So it's been very, very strange. I think what it is for me as a Brit, just seeing it from the outside, seeing how like a political ball game it is. It's like you would get people that should, in theory, be defending the people that are protesting, but because they're not their political stripe, all of a sudden they're on the side of the state. And it's just all it's very strange to see from here. Like, you can see where the division is coming in, like, stronger than ever, I guess is what I'm saying, from abroad anyway.
Yeah, it's weird because, like, as I grew up in the South, right? Like, and Waco was, I didn't grow up all that far from Waco. So, like, the fucking raid on the Branch Davidian compound was like a thing. And growing up, it was always this, like, the conservatives and libertarians hated the feds, right? And the fact now you have conservatives and libertarians defending federal stormtroopers doing extraordinary renditions in, like, unmarked vans is so weird to me that, like, things flipped around to that level.
Right. I used to follow the, like, Michigan militia kind of movement. That was the first thing I saw years, like, over 10 years ago. And to be fair, actually, some of them were all right. But, like, a lot of the kind of anti-government militias flipped to pro-government overnight when Trump came in. But there was a guy I was talking to recently, like, to play the devil's advocate, I was saying the same as you. I was like, how can these anti-government libertarians suddenly be, on the side of the feds? And he said, well, look, these groups have been trying to bash the right-wingers for however long. Why should we protect them now? And I was like, oh, that is actually interesting. Like, I mean, the argument is that, well, you claim you love the Constitution, and I think it even says about defending your enemy, right? But it's, I don't know, it's an interesting side of it. I think it shows that how, I don't know, it's just all so superficial now, I think, a lot of this ideology.
But there's also this level to which people are getting, like, radicalized in a way that I haven't seen before. So, like, you made a point about, like, it being most people not attacking the courthouse. And that's been truer at, like, some of the very large actions where there's been thousands. But we did have, like, last Monday, we had about 1,500 people show up, and they were kind of all down to tear down the courthouse. Like, I was standing in a line with, like, this wall of moms, which is kind of this, it's a bunch of local moms who are mostly don't have a huge amount of protest experience. We're all very new to getting tear gassed a couple of weeks ago. And, not traditional radicals. And I'm, like, standing there, as everybody's, like, banging on the doors of this courthouse. And this one mom behind me says, we should get a sledgehammer and break down the door. And then she starts trying to break down the door with her body. And, like, it was pretty. And we had all these, like, boogaloo types, right, show up in their Hawaiian shirts. And once the tear gas started flying, most of those guys left really quickly. But there were, like, groups of moms in their yellow shirts hucking grenades back at the feds. It was like, things have gotten very strange here.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to be like, this is very cliche and corny, but technically it's a popular front because it's not all people that agree with everything, but it's all people that agree with the one thing. And I feel like that's more, in terms of protests, I've seen that happen a few times, very few times, but it's more organic and actually sustainable than a brutally politically ideological thing. So when some people are like, they don't even have, like, a strict ideology, they're all over the place, it's like, well, yeah, that's kind of how, like, actual real protest happens, because it's just so many people pissed off at the same thing, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's kind of what's going on. And it's I don't know, it's not something I really expected. I moved here because I expected something kind of like this to happen, just because Portland has, we've had these escalating series of protests between, like, right-wing and left-wing demonstrators for a while here. It's kind of in a perfect area for this to happen because Portland's very liberal, sometimes even bordering on leftist, whereas kind of the surrounding suburbs and countryside is more conservative. So it seemed like a good bet for a place where something like this might occur. But I'm kind of shocked by the extent to which it's been happening, right? I didn't expect it to be like it has been. 60-something straight nights of almost entire. Most of them have been riots. Most of them have been like declared riots, right?
Heavy clashes, though, right?
Yeah, like if you want my opinion, I think we've only had one thing that I would declare as a riot, where you just have, like, a lot of random people in the city destroying stuff and looting. Like, that happened.
Yeah. I always say that as well. Like, that's all right. It's attacking shops when it's spread. That's all right. Like, a kind of focused clash is not the same as a riot, and it's like they seem to be focused. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but the police, so there was like an injunction put against the police kind of midway through that said they couldn't use tear gas anymore unless it was a life-threatening situation. So they started declaring everything a riot, because if it's a riot, a riot's a life-threatening situation by definition. So if they declare it a riot, they get to tear gas everybody, you know?
Right, yeah. It's all in the paperwork, huh? Jesus. All right, Robert, mate. Thank you very much. I know you've been out there every night. Like, I know you're very tired, so thanks for doing this, man. Where can people follow you reporting on this?
You can find me on Twitter at @IWriteOK. I'd also recommend checking in with a couple of friends of mine. You can follow Tuck Woodstock at Tuck Woodstock. You can follow the 45th Absurdist Brigade, which is a little journalist collective in town, at 45th Absurdist. Garrison Davis, young photojournalist, at Hungry Bowtie. Those are all good people to follow. And Mr. Olmos on Twitter, Sergio Olmos, he's a local reporter, but he's been doing a lot of stuff for the New York Times since this all started. He's great. Follow local Portland journalists. They've got the story, and they've been doing the hell out of it since it began.
Yeah, 100% behind that. Follow local journalists, definitely. Not those that are always parachuted in, which I have done a lot, but like definitely follow local journalists.
So have I, yeah. Portland's case, though, you've got a pretty good press corps that really, I think, does have a handle on this.
All right, Robert, thank you very much, mate, and get some rest.
Yeah, thanks, man. Bye.
Cheers, bro. That was Robert Evans speaking about the clashes in Portland, Oregon. Definitely check him out, and all the people he mentioned are doing great work out there. If you want to support Popular Front, as always, go to patreon.com/popularfront. We've got loads of stuff going on there now. We've got this new series, Too Cool for J School, which the name is tongue-in-cheek, relax, but we're doing a series basically teaching people that are not going to journalism school, not going to uni, any of that, or if they are, they can learn extra from this series that we're making. So yeah, patreon.com/popularfront. Go and check that out. There's bonus episodes, access to the Discord, discounts for merchandise, all sorts. Get merchandise at popularfront.shop on social medias. We are Twitter is /popularfrontco. Instagram is popular.front. YouTube, youtube.com/popularfront. What else? Yeah. I don't know. There's too much going on at the minute. So this episode is sponsored by Oracle Coffee Shop in Portland, Oregon, USA, where this episode is about. They're an independent coffee shop selling only fair trade products. See them at 3875 Southwest Bond Avenue, 97239. The episode is also sponsored by Grindcore House, a pair of independent coffee shops in Philadelphia, USA. One in the south, one in the west. Check them out on social media at Grindcore House. And this episode is also sponsored by Propagandopolis, an outlet selling and informing people about historical conflict propaganda. You can get brilliant prints at propagandopolis.com. It's propagandopolis.com. Mad. Propagandopolis. If you say it like that, it sounds Greek, I guess, whatever. Check them out. Thank you very much to our high tier Patreons. They are Jav, Bastian, Guillermo Rittmeyer, I think that is. Tell me if I've said that wrong. Ian Froese, James Cully, Michael Ackerman, Ethan Reyes, Fitz Madrid, Joe Watt, Alex Northrop, Ed Coulthard, Johnny LaFleur, Clayton Taylor, Hugo Newski, Maxwell Burke, BREN86, The Cyborg, Anthony Kabarak, Don Wayne, Scott Hopton, Liam Williams, Fragile Feeling, Chris Cusimano, Sebastian from the Discord, Degenerate Zero Alpha, Chris Davis, DR, Trey Nance, Charlie, Olin Thorne, Amy Rupert, Rubicon, where are we? What's going on here? Alright, Prashant Singh, Azad, Frank Austin, Amelia Mee, Christina Rovetti, Moody Al Rashid, Bill Wilson, Emiliano, Andrew Hurley, Vida Provost, Brian McLaughlin, Ari from the Discord, Young Wasabi, Surushe Hawazi, Tony Bin, Adam Bergsnyder, Scartoon Music, Stephen Davila, Patrick Bronte, Dan Dunham, Fletcher Tate, Chad Walker, Diana Gorvanek, Q-Ball, Lawrence Abrahams, Peter McCormick from What Bitcoin Did, Emily Molly, Axel Iverson, Christopher Martin, Ryan Sandercock, Daniel Shearer, and Joanne Stocker. Thank you all very, very much. Really appreciate that. If you guys weren't about, then we wouldn't be flying ahead as we are. So go to patreon.com/popularfront. The more we raise there, the more money we get. You know, we do everything independently. The more you will get with Popular Front, basically. And if we hit the next goal on our Patreon, there's going to be a full Popular Front series that will go into production. We're close. I'd say maybe by, I don't know, maybe in the next couple of months we'll get there. But if we hit that, yeah, we're going to start it was going to be the video magazine, but I'm thinking let's just jump straight ahead and do the series, which I don't know, I've kind of talked about it. I've changed the name of it. It would be called Bad Signal, the wars you won't see in the news. And it's basically going to be us going to all these conflicts that you just don't hear about in the news that are currently going on, sort of stuff we cover in Popular Front, but we'd like to go there and film it on the ground and make a documentary series about that, saying, hey, you should be aware that, you know, there are other wars other than Syria or Libya or whatever. Well, Libya is a bad example because you barely hear about that, but you know what I'm saying. It's going to be like the kind of forgotten wars that are ongoing. In a series. I think it'll be good. So yeah, patreon.com/popularfront. Music in this episode, the intro was by Home and the outro was by Sam Black. Follow him at samblackpf.com. You'll be rediverted to his SoundCloud. Cheers.